I learned how to disappear before I ever learned how to live. The mirror in the staff bathroom flickered under harsh fluorescent lights, turning my reflection into something I barely recognized, something easier to ignore if I didn't look too long. My name is Emily Carter, 26, 5'4", and according to most people who thought their opinions mattered, too much of everything that didn't fit into a size they respected. I adjusted the black uniform apron around my waist, tugging it tighter even though it never really made a difference, smoothing it like I could press myself into something smaller, quieter, less noticeable. Outside, the dinner rush had already started, the low hum of expensive conversations blending with clinking glasses and polished laughter that didn't belong to people like me. I stepped back into the dining room with my tray balanced carefully in both hands, eyes down, shoulders slightly rounded, the way you learn to move when you don't want to take up space. When you don't want to invite attention you know won't be kind. Table 12 waved me over before I could even breathe. For people dressed like money had never been a question, their voices loud enough to carry, their smiles sharp in a way that felt practiced. I approached with the same script I'd repeated 1,000 times, voice steady, polite, invisible. "Good evening, can I start you with, you're new?" One of them interrupted, looking me up and down like I was something on display. Not curious. Not kind. Just measuring. I felt it immediately, that familiar tightening in my chest, the instinct to shrink even further, but there was nowhere left to go. "No," I said softly, keeping my tone even. "I've been here about 8 months. A pause. A smirk. "Really? Funny. I feel like I would have remembered you." Laughter followed, light, effortless, the kind that didn't consider the weight it carried. My fingers tightened slightly around the tray, knuckles paling, but I kept my expression neutral, professional, like none of it landed. Because reacting only made it worse. It always did. I took their orders, wrote everything down carefully, repeated it back without a mistake, and turned to leave, but not before catching the final comment, just loud enough. Not exactly the kind of face you expect in a place like this. More laughter. It echoed longer than it should have. I moved faster after that, weaving through tables, focusing on tasks, on movement, on anything that kept my mind from replaying their words over and over like a song I couldn't turn off. The kitchen doors swung open, heat hitting me instantly, grounding me for a second, just long enough to breathe. I told myself it didn't matter. It never mattered. People said things. People always said things. You learned to carry it, or you didn't survive it. When I stepped back out with their drinks, I kept my eyes fixed on the tray, on the glasses, on the careful balance of liquid that required more attention than anything else. But something shifted in the room before I reached them. It wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious. It was the kind of change you felt before you understood it, like the air itself had adjusted. Conversations dipped slightly. Heads turned, just a fraction. I didn't look up at first. I couldn't afford to drop anything. But then I noticed the space near the back corner, the VIP section that was usually reserved for people whose names carried weight, was no longer empty. A man sat there now, alone, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit that fit like it had been made for him and no one else. He wasn't talking, wasn't eating, just watching. Not the room. Me. I felt it before I met his eyes, that unmistakable awareness crawling up my spine, forcing my head to lift despite every instinct telling me not to. Our gazes locked for a second that stretched too long to ignore. His expression didn't change. No smile. No judgment. Just something steady. Intent. Like he wasn't seeing what everyone else saw. And for the first time that night, I forgot how to disappear. I told myself it was nothing. Just another customer. Just another pair of eyes in a room full of people who would forget me the second they walked out the door. But my hands did not believe that lie as I set the glasses down one by one. Careful, precise. Because spilling anything would give them another reason to laugh. Another excuse to look at me the way they already did. The table barely acknowledged me this time. Too busy finishing their conversation. Too busy existing in a world where I did not belong. And for a second I thought, maybe I could slip away unnoticed again, fade back into the rhythm of the night. But I felt it, that same presence from across the room, steady and unshaken, like it had not moved since the moment I noticed it. I should not have looked again. I knew that. Every instinct I had built over years of learning how to survive rooms like this told me to keep my head down, to stay small, to move on, But something in me hesitated, something unfamiliar, something that felt dangerously close to curiosity. So I glanced up. He was still there. Same posture, same stillness. But now there was something else, something sharper in his gaze, not cold, not mocking, just focused, like he had already decided something, and I was the only one who did not know what it was yet. I turned away quickly, heart beating a little faster than it should have, telling myself it meant nothing, that it could not mean anything. But the air felt different now, heavier, like the room was holding its breath without realizing it. I moved through my section, checking on other tables, refilling water, clearing plates, doing everything I was supposed to do, but I could not shake the feeling that I was being watched, not in the way I was used to, not the quick judgment or the passing glance, but something quieter, something that stayed. Minutes passed, maybe 10, maybe 20. Time stretched in strange ways when you were aware of every movement, every step, every second you were visible. Then the kitchen called for a pickup and I stepped inside, grateful for the noise, the heat, the distraction, letting it ground me again, just long enough to convince myself I had imagined it. Orders ready, plates lined up, I balanced them carefully on my tray and pushed back through the doors. And that is when everything shifted. The table that had laughed at me went silent. Not gradually, not naturally, instantly, like someone had pressed pause on their world. I slowed without meaning to, my eyes flicking toward them, confusion cutting through my focus, and then I saw why. He was standing beside their table. Up close, he was taller than I had realized, broad shoulders, posture effortless but commanding, like the space around him adjusted to fit him instead of the other way around. His suit was dark, perfectly tailored, every detail precise, but it was not the clothes that changed the room. It was him, the way people noticed without wanting to stare, the way conversations nearby softened without anyone being told to be quiet. No one introduced him. No one asked who he was. They already knew, or they understood enough not to question it. One of the men at the table tried to smile, tried to speak, but the confidence from before was gone, replaced by something uncertain, something careful. I stopped a few steps away, tray still in my hands, unsure whether to move forward or disappear completely, caught in that fragile moment where everything could go either way. Then his voice cut through the silence, low and controlled, not raised, not forced, but it carried anyway. Was there a problem here? It was not loud, but it did not need to be. The question hung in the air, simple and impossible to ignore. No one answered immediately. The man who had spoken earlier shifted in his seat, glancing at his friends like they might help him find the right response, but no one stepped in. And then, slowly, the man looked at me. Not at my uniform, not at my body, at me, like I was part of the conversation, like I had always been. Did they treat you with respect? He asked, his tone softer now, but somehow more direct, more personal, like the answer mattered in a way I did not understand. My throat tightened unexpectedly, words catching somewhere between instinct and disbelief, because no one had ever asked me that before, not here, not anywhere that mattered, and for a second I did not know how to respond, not because I did not have an answer, but because I was not used to anyone wanting to hear it. I could have lied. That would have been easier. That would have been safer. The version of me that had survived every room like this one whispered that I should smile, shake my head, say everything was fine, and walk away before the moment turned into something I could not control. But the way he looked at me made it impossible to pretend, not because he demanded the truth, but because for the first time it felt like the truth would not be dismissed. My fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the tray, grounding myself in something solid as my voice came out quieter than I intended, but steady enough to be heard. They were not kind. The words felt small compared to what had actually happened, but they carried anyway, hanging in the space between us. Silence followed, heavier this time, thicker, like the entire room understood something had shifted but did not know how far it would go. I saw it in their faces, the table that had laughed earlier, the confidence draining in subtle ways, shoulders stiffening, smiles fading, eyes flicking between him and me as if recalculating something they had not considered before. He did not look at them right away. He kept his gaze on me for one more second, just long enough to make sure I had finished, just long enough to acknowledge what I had said like it mattered. Then he turned. It was not a dramatic movement. No sudden gestures. Just a shift in attention that changed everything. You heard her, he said calmly, his tone even, controlled, but there was something underneath it, something final that did not leave room for misunderstanding. One of the men let out a short, awkward laugh, the kind people use when they are trying to recover control of a situation they already lost. "Come on, man, it was just a joke," he said, glancing at the others for support, but no one joined him this time. The laughter did not come back. It stayed quiet. "Then you will apologize," the man in front of me replied, just as calmly, like he was stating something obvious, something that did not need to be debated. The words were simple, but they landed differently than anything else that had been said that night. Not loud, not aggressive, just certain, the kind of certainty that made people listen even when they did not want to. The man hesitated. I saw it clearly, the flicker of resistance, of pride, of the instinct to push back, but it faded just as quickly, replaced by something else, something closer to caution. He shifted in his seat, glanced at me briefly, then looked away, clearing his throat before speaking. "I am sorry," he muttered, the words rushed, uncomfortable, but real enough to register. It was not perfect. It was not heartfelt, but it was something I had never heard in moments like this. Not from people like them, not directed at someone like me. I stood there for a second longer than I should have, the tray still in my hands, trying to process the fact that the world had not ended, that no one was laughing anymore, that the air felt different, lighter in a way I did not know how to explain. Then I realized I was still part of the scene, still visible. An instinct kicked back in, urging me to move, to step away before the attention shifted again. But before I could turn, his voice reached me once more, softer now, closer. "Emily." My name. It stopped me completely. I turned back, confusion cutting through everything else because I had not told him that, because no one had introduced us, because this entire night had already crossed into something I did not understand. He held my gaze, the intensity still there, but changed, less sharp, more deliberate. "You do not have to rush," he said quietly, like he had read the exact thought running through my mind. My grip on the tray loosened slightly, the tension in my shoulders easing just enough for me to breathe normally again. Around us, the restaurant slowly began to come back to life. Conversations restarting in low murmurs, people pretending they had not been watching, but I could feel it, the difference in the way they looked now. Not admiration, not even respect, just awareness. Like I was no longer invisible. And for the first time in a long time, I did not immediately try to disappear. The tray felt heavier than it had a minute ago, like the weight of everything that had just happened had settled into my hands. But I forced myself to move, to finish what I started, because routine was the only thing that still made sense. I set the last plate down at the table with steady precision, avoiding eye contact, not out of fear this time, but because I did not know what expression I would find if I looked. No one spoke as I worked. No one laughed. The shift was quiet but undeniable, like the room had learned a lesson it had not expected. When I finally stepped back, I exhaled slowly, turning away before the moment could stretch any further, before I could overthink what it meant, before I could question whether it had even been real. I walked toward the kitchen, each step measured, controlled, but my mind was not as steady, replaying his voice, the way he said my name, the way he had asked if I had been treated with respect like it was something I deserved without question. That thought alone felt unfamiliar, almost fragile, like something I was not supposed to hold on to for too long. The kitchen doors swung open and the noise hit me again, sharp and grounding, pulling me back into the rhythm of orders and movement and responsibility. "What happened out there?" Maria's voice came from my left, low and curious, her eyes scanning my face like she was trying to read something I had not said yet. I shook my head slightly, placing the empty tray down, reaching for the next order slip as if nothing had changed. "Nothing," I said automatically, because explaining it would make it real, and I was not sure I was ready for that. She did not look convinced, but she did not push, just nodded slowly before turning back to her station. I focused on the next order, then the next, letting the routine carry me forward, letting it rebuild the version of myself that knew how to exist without being seen. Minutes passed, maybe more, until I felt it again. That shift. Subtle, quiet, but unmistakable. I looked up before I could stop myself. He was standing near the edge of the kitchen entrance now, not inside, not crossing into the staff space, but close enough to be noticed, close enough that everyone nearby instinctively gave him room without being asked. Conversations dipped again, not completely, just enough to acknowledge his presence. He did not look at anyone else. Just me. My breath caught slightly, not from fear, not exactly, but from the intensity of being chosen out of a room full of people. I wiped my hands on my apron without thinking, a nervous habit I could not seem to control, and took a small step forward, unsure if I was supposed to approach or wait. He made the decision for me, closing the distance with a few calm steps, stopping just short of the line that separated his world from mine. Up close, the details became clearer, the subtle lines of his expression, the calm control in the way he held himself, the kind of presence that did not need to prove anything because it already knew. "Are you on break?" he asked, his voice lower now, quieter, meant only for me. I blinked, caught off guard by the simplicity of the question, by the normalcy of it after everything else. "Not yet," I answered, my voice softer than I intended, but steady enough to hold. He nodded once, as if he had expected that answer, as if he had already considered what came next. "Then I will wait," he said. Just like that. No hesitation. No explanation. The words settled between us with a weight I could not immediately process, because no one waited for me. Not here, not anywhere that mattered. And yet he said it like it was the most natural thing in the world. I stared at him for a second longer than I should have, searching his face for something that would make sense of it, something that would tell me this was temporary, accidental, a misunderstanding that would fade as quickly as it appeared. But there was nothing uncertain in his expression. Only patience. Only intention. And for the first time, the idea of someone choosing not to walk away from me felt more overwhelming than anything else that had happened that night. I tried to return to work like nothing had changed, but everything had. And the worst part was that no one had announced it. No one had explained it. It had just shifted quietly beneath my feet like the ground itself had decided to move without warning. Orders blurred together in front of me. Numbers, table placements, small details that I normally handled without thinking now requiring more focus than they should have, because part of my attention stayed fixed on the edge of the room, on the place where he stood, exactly where he said he would be, not impatient, not distracted, just waiting. I checked once, then again, each time expecting him to be gone, expecting reality to correct itself, but he did not move, and somehow that unsettled me more than if he had disappeared. People like him did not wait. Not for someone like me. That was not how the world worked. "Emily, you good?" Maria's voice cut through my thoughts again as she passed by, carrying 2 plates, her eyes flicking toward the entrance for just a second before returning. To me with a look that was half curiosity, half concern. I nodded quickly, maybe too quickly. "Yeah, just busy," I said, because it was easier than explaining something I did not understand myself. She hesitated like she wanted to say more, then just gave a small shrug and kept moving, leaving me alone with the noise of the kitchen and the quiet awareness of everything happening outside it. Minutes stretched. My shift did not end, but my mind kept counting down anyway, measuring time in glances, in footsteps, in the steady rhythm of my heartbeat that seemed louder than usual. I told myself I should ignore it, that the smartest thing to do was to stay focused, to finish my shift and leave like any other night. But the idea of walking out without knowing why he was still there felt incomplete in a way I could not ignore. Finally, the manager called for a short rotation break, not long, maybe 10 minutes, just enough to breathe, and before I could overthink it, I found myself untying my apron, folding it carefully like I always did, placing it in the same spot I always used, clinging to routine as if it could steady everything else. I stepped out of the kitchen slowly, aware of every movement, every eye that might still be watching, but the room had returned to its usual rhythm, conversations flowing, laughter softer now, more contained, like something had reminded everyone where the boundaries were. And he was still there, exactly where he said he would be, waiting for me. I stopped a few feet away, not too close, not too far, unsure of what distance felt right in a moment that already felt unreal. For a second, neither of us spoke. I noticed the details again, the calm in his posture, the way he did not fill the silence with unnecessary words, like he trusted it to hold its own weight. "You stayed," I said before I could stop myself, the words slipping out softer than I intended, carrying more meaning than I had planned. His expression did not change much, but there was something in his eyes, something almost like understanding. I said I would. He replied simply, like that explained everything, like consistency was not something rare. I nodded slowly, unsure how to respond to that, because I did not have a reference point for it. Not in this setting, not with someone like him. My hands felt awkward without the tray, without something to hold on to, so I clasped them lightly in front of me, grounding myself in the small pressure. Why? The question came out before I could filter it. Honest, direct, carrying the confusion I had been trying to contain. I watched him carefully, expecting deflection, expecting something vague or dismissive, but he did not look away, did not hesitate. Because you were treated as if you did not matter, he said, his voice calm, steady, like he was stating a fact that did not need embellishment. And that was incorrect. The simplicity of it hit harder than anything else that night, because he did not try to comfort me, did not try to soften it, he just corrected it, like the world had made a mistake and he intended to fix it. I swallowed slowly, my throat tightening again, not from embarrassment this time, but from something deeper, something unfamiliar, something that felt dangerously close to being seen in a way I had spent years avoiding. I looked down for a second, then back up, meeting his gaze fully this time, not out of obligation, but because I wanted to understand. And for the first time, I did not feel like I needed to disappear to survive the moment. His words did not feel like a compliment. They felt like a correction, like he had looked at the situation and simply decided that the version of reality everyone else accepted was wrong. And that unsettled me in a way I could not immediately explain. I had spent years adjusting myself to fit other people's expectations, shrinking, softening, avoiding anything that might draw attention. And he stood there as if none of that effort had ever been necessary, as if the problem had never been me to begin with. Incorrect, I repeated quietly, almost to myself, testing the word like it might break if I held it too tightly. He did not smile, did not soften it, just watched me with that same steady focus, like he was waiting to see what I would do with it. I let out a slow breath, trying to ground myself in something familiar, but there was nothing familiar about this moment, about him, about the way he stood there without rushing, without filling. The silence, like he understood that I needed time to catch up to what was happening. People say things all the time, I said finally, my voice quieter now, not defensive, just honest, because denying it would have been pointless. It does not usually change anything. I expected him to argue, to push back, to tell me I was wrong, but he did not. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, considering my words like they mattered just as much as his. That depends, he said after a second, his tone still calm, still controlled, on who allows it to continue. The statement settled into me slowly, deeper than I expected, because it was not just about tonight, not just about those people. It was about something larger, something I had never really questioned before. I had always believed that enduring was the only option, that staying quiet was the safest path, that reacting would only make things worse. But standing in front of him, that belief felt less certain, less solid than it had a few minutes ago. I shifted my weight slightly, glancing around the room out of habit, checking for eyes, for attention, but the restaurant had moved on, or at least it was pretending to, and for once, I did not feel like I was being watched in the same way. You do not even know me, I said, the thought slipping out before I could stop it, not as a challenge, but as a fact I needed to understand. His gaze did not waver. I know enough, he replied simply. That answer should have frustrated me, should have felt vague or dismissive, but it did not. It felt intentional, like he was choosing his words carefully, like he was giving me exactly what he meant and nothing more. I studied him for a moment, trying to piece together who he was, why everyone in the room had shifted the way they did when he stood up, why no one had questioned him, why even the people who had been laughing earlier had fallen silent without being told. Who are you? I asked, the question quiet but direct, because pretending not to be curious would have been another kind of lie. For the first time, something changed in his expression, not much, just a slight shift, like he had expected the question but had not decided how to answer it yet. Someone who does not tolerate disrespect, he said after a moment, and while it was not a name, it felt more revealing than one. I exhaled slowly, absorbing that, realizing that whatever world he came from operated on a different set of rules, rules that did not align with the ones I had learned to survive by. A voice called my name from behind me, pulling me back to reality, reminding me that this moment existed inside a larger one, that I still had responsibilities, still had a job to finish. I glanced over my shoulder briefly, then back at him, reluctant in a way I did not fully understand. "I have to get back," I said, the words coming out softer than I intended, like I was apologizing for something that was not my fault. He nodded once, not surprised, not disappointed, just acknowledging it. "Of course," he said. Simple. Expected. But as I turned to leave, I felt it again, that subtle shift inside me, like something had been adjusted just enough that I could not go back to seeing things the same way. And for the first time, I was not sure I wanted to. I told myself I would forget about him the moment I stepped back into the kitchen, that whatever had happened out there belonged to a different version of the night, a version that would not follow me into the rhythm of orders and plates and constant motion. But that was not how it worked. His voice stayed with me. Not loud, not overwhelming, just steady, like a thought I could not push aside. I moved through the rest of my shift on autopilot, repeating the same motions I had practiced for years, balancing trays, refilling glasses, nodding politely. But something underneath had shifted, something small but permanent, like a crack in a belief I had carried for too long. I noticed it in the way I stood a little straighter when I approached tables, in the way I met people's eyes for a second longer than I usually allowed myself. Not challenging, not confrontational, just present in a way I had not been before. And people noticed. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough. Enough that the space around me felt different, like the rules had changed and no one had announced it. The table from earlier stayed quiet for the rest of the night, their voices lower, their behavior contained, like they had learned something they were not eager to repeat. I did not look at them again, not because I was afraid, but because I no longer felt the need to measure myself against their opinions. That alone felt new. When my shift finally ended, the exhaustion hit me all at once, settling into my shoulders, my feet, the familiar ache that came from hours of standing and moving without rest. But beneath it, there was something else, something lighter, something I did not recognize at first. I untied my apron slowly, folding it the same way I always did, placing it in the same spot, grounding myself in routine one last time before stepping out of the kitchen for the final time that night. The restaurant had thinned out, the late hours softening the noise into a quieter hum. Conversations more intimate, lights slightly dimmer, the kind of atmosphere that made everything feel slower, more deliberate. And he was still there, not in the same place this time, but near the exit, standing with the same calm presence, like he had simply relocated without losing his purpose. Waiting. For me. The realization settled in my chest in a way that felt both heavy and strangely steady, like I had expected it even though I had spent the last hour trying to convince myself otherwise. I hesitated for a second, just inside the doorway, giving myself one last chance to walk past him, to pretend none of this had happened, to return to the version of my life that made sense. But my feet did not move in that direction. Instead, I found myself walking toward him, slower than I intended, aware of every step, every breath, every second that stretched between us. When I stopped in front of him, the distance felt smaller than before, not just physically, but in a way I could not quite explain, like something had already bridged the gap before I even took the first step. "You really stayed the entire time?" I said, my voice quiet but steady, not questioning this time, just acknowledging it. He nodded once, his expression unchanged but his attention fully on me, like it had been from the beginning. I said I would. He repeated, and the consistency of that answer did something. To me, something I was not used to, something that felt more reliable than anything I had encountered in a long time. I shifted my weight slightly, my hands instinctively moving to clasp together before I stopped myself, letting them rest at my sides instead, allowing myself to take up just a little more space than I normally would. "You did not have to," I said, not out of obligation, but because I needed to understand the reason behind something that still did not fully make sense to me. His gaze softened just enough to be noticeable, not losing its intensity, but changing its edge. "No," he agreed quietly, "but I chose to." The words settled between us, simple and unforced, but they carried more weight than anything else he had said so far, because they were not about obligation, not about correction, but about intention, and for the first time, I realized that whatever this was, it was not accidental, it was not temporary, and it was not something I could dismiss as easily as I had tried to. I looked at him fully then, not glancing, not avoiding, just looking, and for the first time in my life, I did not feel like I needed to apologize for being seen. I expected the moment to end there, with a quiet exchange and a polite goodbye that would let both of us return to our separate worlds, but he did not step aside, did not signal that this was over, and somehow I knew he was not finished yet. The silence between us stretched again, but it no longer felt uncertain, it felt deliberate, like he was giving me space to choose whether I stayed in it or walked away. I glanced toward the door out of habit, the familiar instinct to leave, to return to the version of my life that required less explanation, less attention, but my feet did not move. Instead, I stayed exactly where I was, standing in front of a man who should not have been waiting for me, and yet had been doing exactly that all night. What happens now? I asked quietly, the question honest, not because I expected a specific answer, but because I needed to understand where this moment was supposed to go. He studied me for a second, not in a way that felt invasive, but in a way that felt measured, like he was considering more than just the question, like he was considering me. That depends on what you want, he said finally, his voice calm, steady, placing the decision somewhere I was not used to holding it. I blinked, caught off guard again, because that was not how things usually worked, not for me, not in situations where someone like him held all the power. People decided things for me all the time, what I deserved, how I should be treated, where I belonged, but standing there, I realized he was not doing that, and that made the moment feel even more unfamiliar. I shifted slightly, the cool air near the entrance brushing against my skin, grounding me just enough to think. I do not know, I admitted, the honesty slipping out before I could filter it, because pretending certainty would have been another kind of defense, and for some reason, I did not feel the need to hide behind it. He nodded once, like that answer made sense, like uncertainty was allowed here. Then we start simple, he said, his tone unchanged, as if he had already anticipated that response. He turned slightly, gesturing toward the door, not forcing, not insisting, just offering direction. Walk with me. The words were not a command, but they carried a quiet confidence that made it feel natural to follow, like it was the next step in something that had already begun. I hesitated for half a second, just long enough to recognize the choice I was making, then stepped forward, closing the small distance between us and moving toward the exit. The night air hit me as soon as we stepped outside, cooler than I expected, carrying the faint sounds of the city, distant traffic, muted conversations, the kind of background noise that reminded me the world was still moving beyond this moment. I wrapped my arms lightly around myself, more out of habit than necessity, and looked up briefly, taking in the streetlights casting soft reflections on the pavement. He stood beside me, not too close, not too far, maintaining that same careful balance he had held all night. For a second, neither of us spoke, the quiet stretching again, but it did not feel empty. It felt full of something I could not quite name. You do not see yourself the way others do, he said. After a moment, his voice lower now, blending into the night instead of standing above it. I let out a small breath, the statement landing somewhere deep, because it was both true and not, because I had spent years seeing myself exactly the way others did, maybe even worse. I see what I have been shown, I replied, my voice steady but softer now, shaped by experience more than belief. He turned his head slightly, looking at me in a way that felt more focused than before, like this part mattered. Then you have been shown the wrong things, he said simply. No hesitation, no doubt, just certainty. I swallowed slowly, the words settling into me in a way that felt unfamiliar, like they were trying to take root in a place that had been closed off for a long time. We started walking then, side by side, not rushed, not aimless, just moving forward, and for the first time, I was not thinking about how I looked, or how I should act, or whether I belonged in the space I was in. I was just there, present, and somehow, that felt like the biggest change of all. We walked without a destination, just along the quiet sidewalk where the city felt softer, less demanding, like it was willing to let the night belong to people who needed a moment to breathe. And I realized something strange as the minutes passed. I was not counting my steps, not adjusting my posture, not wondering how I looked from every angle. I was just walking beside him, present in a way that felt unfamiliar but not uncomfortable. The streetlights cast long shadows ahead of us, stretching and shifting with each step, and for once, I did not feel like I needed to step out of mine. He did not rush me, did not fill the silence with unnecessary conversation, just stayed there, steady, like he understood that this was not about impressing me, not about proving anything, but about letting the moment exist exactly as it was. Why me? I asked finally, the question rising again, quieter this time, less defensive, more genuine, because I needed to understand why someone like him had chosen to notice someone like me in a room full of people who were easier to see. He did not answer immediately. He looked ahead for a second like he was choosing his words carefully, not because he did not know the answer, but because he wanted to give me the right one. Because you were trying to disappear, he said. I blinked, caught off guard by the accuracy of it, by how simply he had seen something I had spent years perfecting. He continued, his voice calm, certain, and you should not have to. The words settled into me in a way that felt different from everything else he had said, because they were not correcting the world, they were addressing me directly, challenging something I had accepted for too long. I let out a slow breath, my gaze dropping briefly to the pavement before lifting again, because for the first time, I did not feel the need to hide behind it. It is easier, I admitted quietly. If no one sees you, no one can decide what you are worth. He stopped walking. I did not notice at first until I took another step and realized he was no longer beside me. I turned back, a small crease forming between my brows, and found him watching me with that same steady focus. But this time, there was something more in it, something deeper, something that made it harder to look away. That is not protection, he said, his voice low but firm. That is permission. The word hit me harder than anything else that night, because it was not comforting, not soft, it was direct, undeniable, and for a second, I did not know how to respond to it. I stood there, the space between us small but significant, my thoughts catching up slowly, because he was not wrong, and that realization was both unsettling and strangely freeing at the same time. He stepped closer then, not invading my space, not overwhelming, just enough to close the distance so his presence felt intentional, not accidental. You allowed them to decide, he continued, his tone unchanged, not judging, just stating a truth I had never questioned out loud. And they were not qualified to do that. I felt something shift again, deeper this time, like a foundation I had built my entire understanding on was being gently but firmly moved, not broken, not destroyed, just repositioned. I swallowed, my chest tightening slightly, but not in the same way it had before, not from embarrassment or fear, but from something else, something that felt like possibility. And you are? I asked softly, not as a challenge, but as a genuine question, because if he was going to challenge everything I believed about myself, I needed to understand why his perspective was any different. For the first time, a faint change touched his expression, not quite a smile, but something close, something that carried both confidence and restraint. I am someone who sees clearly, he said. No arrogance. No hesitation. Just certainty. I held his gaze for a long moment, searching for doubt, for inconsistency, for anything that would make this easier to dismiss. But there was nothing uncertain in the way he looked at me, nothing that suggested he would change his mind once the moment passed. And that was the part that scared me the most, because it meant this was not temporary, not a passing kindness that would fade with the night. It was something intentional, something chosen. The city moved quietly around us, distant headlights passing, a soft breeze brushing against my skin, but for the first time, none of it felt overwhelming, none of it made me want to shrink or step back. I took a small breath, steadying myself, then another, letting the silence settle again. But this time it felt different, not like something I needed to fill, but something I could stand in without losing myself. I do not know how to be seen, I admitted finally, the words leaving me slowly, honestly, because pretending I did would have been another kind of hiding. His gaze did not soften, but it did not need to. It remained steady, unwavering. Then you learn, he said simply. Not rushed, not forced, just certain. I looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time in my life, I did not measure myself against what I thought he expected to see. I just existed in the moment, exactly as I was, without apology. And somewhere between the version of me who had walked into that restaurant trying to disappear and the version standing here, now under the quiet glow of streetlights. Something had changed in a way I could not undo. He did not change my body. He changed what I believed I deserved.